All right, it looks like folks are joining. I'll be waiting a few minutes to start, 2 minutes probably. So while you're getting comfortable, maybe getting a cup of coffee or a snack, I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. And you can do that by saying where you are in the world, maybe something you ate at your last meal, if you want to share that. And yeah, we'll just wait for a few more people to join. You don't need to write your name because that will show up in the chat. Kat from Chicago, welcome. I see a few familiar names in this chat, so you should introduce yourself before I call you out. Egg bites from Starbucks, classic. I personally enjoy the red pepper egg bites, the little souffles. So we've got Kyle from Florida, James from New Jersey, a whole cohort from New Jersey. I grew up in upstate New York, actually, so pretty far from New Jersey, but Oregon. Okay, so I'm from Oregon. And so Tyler, good to see you. I'm in Eugene. You should wave if you're in the neighborhood. All right, we got a global representation, Calgary. Now, Leicestershire is how I would pronounce Joshua, where you're from, because I spent some time in Massachusetts, but I probably botched the pronunciation. Anyhow, welcome. All right, looks like we've got a good crew. Oh, nice. Got the pronunciation right. Hello from Taiwan. Welcome, Ian. Okay, great crew here. Really appreciate you putting your names out there. Just feeling excited to be with this group. So, okay, let's. I think we can begin. Great. So let's get started. Welcome to our virtual hands-on lab. Pulling up my presenter notes. Sorry about that. Okay, welcome to our virtual hands-on lab. This is becoming a tradition that we do here at Datafold. We really want to get you intro to our open source data-diff tool. We're super excited to share what we've been working on. And today we're going to focus on test-driven development with DBT, and as I mentioned, our open source data-diff tool. So let's get started. A little about me. My name is Leo Folsom. As I mentioned, I'm here in Oregon, and I am a solutions engineer at Datafold. I joined Datafold because I realized there was nothing at all protecting me from creating unexpected data changes when I updated DBT code. That kind of scared me. So at a past company, I did work on some internal tooling to try to solve this problem. At the time, I also dug into open source tools that worked on this. That's when data-diff caught my eye, and truly, no one was tackling the problem head-on like Datafold, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to join this team. You might be thinking, what about DBT tests? I have lots of those. I will get to that. DBT tests are, in short, necessary, but not sufficient. So stick with me. I hope to convince you of that. By the end of this call, you will know what's a data diff, why you need them in your life. You will also get set up in a real DBT project, run some data diffs, and see the tool in action. So we've designed this to allow you to try out data diff in real time, but no pressure at all. Feel free to sit back, relax, and watch, or try out the tool later after you get this intro. I'll also introduce my colleague, Dan Lowen. He is in the chat. He largely built the data-diff DBT integration, and so he will be there to clarify, correct me if I'm off track, answer questions. I do encourage you to use the questions tab. If you have like a real solid question that you are hoping Dan can more formally answer, the chat is of course available for heckling and other chit chat. So, oh, I also want to mention, I'll mention this a couple times. We encourage you to join the tools Datafold channel in the DBT Slack. We hang out there. So getting right into it, thinking about data quality. How does it make you feel? Feel free to throw a response in the chat. Just let those words sink in for a minute. Data quality. So for a normal and average person, you might think of accounting, or you might think that's like a very boring term. It's unimportant, unnecessary. For data people, it's a completely different experience, I tend to find. By the way, I do encourage you to throw an answer in the chat if you do have any kind of experience, positive, negative, or otherwise, any word that comes to mind around data quality. For me, I can honestly feel my stomach turning as I think about data quality. And I think some of you probably have a similar reaction, but I definitely am curious if that's true, not true. So please keep me on track there. I consider data quality to be something that can be deeply traumatic. For me, this came to a head while working at a healthcare analytics company. The numbers down to the penny were either correct or not. If we cleverly updated a metric or a prediction to be better, and the numbers changed in some unexpected way, yeah, I see some vomiting emojis. We need more data quality from Kat. Yep. Yeah, if the numbers changed in an unexpected way at this company, it was really, really bad. It was kind of the whole point of the company was for us to get the numbers right. And so just thinking back to some of those conversations, that was when I started to think there has to be some better way. So I do encourage you to share any experiences you might have in the chat where you really felt burned by data quality, or wished you had, some nightmare scenario that you were in. It is a safe space. We will not share your answers outside of this meeting. And we will also be supportive. We are basically building data-diff because it doesn't have to be this way. The weight of data quality should not be on the shoulders of individual developers to use superhuman capabilities to catch every mistake, either in their own code or while code reviewing someone else's code. So I'll walk through how data-diff can protect you against those scenarios. Zooming out a little bit, you might have heard us use the word development testing as a subset of data testing. So we will be focused on development testing today, but I just want to walk through what we mean by that. So development testing happens all the way to the left, typically before you open a pull request. And by the left, I mean in the sense of shift left. Do things earlier in the process, catch mistakes sooner. So you might be editing code in an editor like VS Code. You might execute your first DBT run and DBT test. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, where you're really just getting started with any code changes you might make, and you can get data-diff in your workflow at that point, way to the left. Deployment testing, that happens further to the right, around the time of deployment, maybe after you open a pull request. Maybe you have a CI staging job. So that is part of our cloud product, not what we're going to be focusing on today. We're focusing on development testing, honestly, because we heard the people were opening PRs just to run Datafold. So let that sink in for a minute. They really weren't ready for a code review from their teammate, but they have Datafold in CI, and so they wanted to know what Datafold had to say about their code in its current state. It's like really not actually the time to kick off your entire CI job. You just want diff results. And we'll get to what diff results look like. So hearing that, it seemed inefficient. It was kind of annoying for people. And so we built tooling to help people diff earlier in the development process. So let's begin. Another opportunity for audience participation before we actually get into the hands-on coding part of this session, a pop quiz. So please throw your answers in the chat. Select all that apply. How do you check your work? How do you data test today? And I will be walking through the options in cringe-inducing detail. Option A is nothing at all. This type of data testing is pretty self-explanatory. I think we've all been there. You roll the dice and you hope for the best. Maybe you're in a hurry, maybe you don't know how to test it. You get the idea. Ad hoc queries. These are, I think we've definitely all been there. Ad hoc queries will answer the questions you can think of. So they might catch the thing that burned you last time. They might not catch the thing that's about to burn you. It's definitely a good start. And there will always be a place for writing SQL to investigate data, without a doubt. DBT tests. So I mentioned these early on. DBT tests should absolutely be a part of your testing framework. Every primary key should be unique and not null. For example, certain columns should have only a set of accepted values, the accepted values test. But what happens, how do you catch it when let's say every financial figure from some customer segment shifts by $1? I don't know what the DBT test would be for that, because you'd still have dollar figures, wouldn't be null. They're not expected to be unique. What's the DBT test? Another example is if, let's just say, every first name value gets doubled, or some weird character is appended to it. There's nothing really saying that's invalid. No test would fail. If Leo became Leo, there's no DBT test for that. So I could go on. There's a lot of scenarios where DBT tests can save you and a lot where they can't. Finally, you could download the data, export it, CSV, Excel, whatever, dump it into a spreadsheet. I probably don't need to belabor the fact that this can be error prone, it can be laborious. And as I like to say, Excel is rocket science. You don't want to end up like NASA and have a data set that's larger than Excel can handle, or some formula in the background of Excel that someone else doesn't understand, or it's referencing the wrong column. There's a lot of pitfalls, a lot of power in Excel, but a lot of pitfalls. So let's just work with these tools A through D that I think are all pretty familiar to us all. So I'm going to put them in action and talk through an example change and kind of review the current state. So this should be a simple change to a DBT model. We have a dim-orgs model, and this is what we'll be focusing on for the rest of this session, this dim-orgs model. And right now, it's built on top of a user signed in model. And the reason we're making this change is because signed in, that's going to catch most members. Most orgs are going to have some sign in, but we realized that that's not going to catch all orgs. Orgs aren't going to show up when they've just been created for the first time if they've been created manually. We don't want to miss any orgs at all. We have to know how many customers we have. So that is why we're making this change. We're instead going to use the org created upstream table to form kind of the base of dim orgs. So before we merge the change, we want to be really sure that we understand the impact. We want to be able to answer the question when your boss or the CEO says, why do we go from 346 to 348 customers? Or why did our average revenue per customer just go down? As data practitioners, I feel in my core, we should know the answers to those questions. So we want to make this code change. How did that work today? I think you're all familiar with this visual, git diff. It shows you the code changes. And so we might generate this git diff either locally, or we might submit a PR, ask our colleague to review it. And what happens next? Well, is your colleague going to be able to look at this and really know what's going on? Do they have the full context? Are you really relying on them to actually convert code and convert this git diff that they can look at to data impact in their head or maybe manually? Is that something that you feel comfortable that you can do as you code, or do you need to write a bunch of manual checks? How do you get to a place where you feel confident enough to push to production from this code diff that we're looking at? So let's imagine the best case scenario. You and your colleague have time and energy and discipline to go into a rigorous deep dive. By the way, your DBT tests for uniqueness and null values already passed. So we're going to check for record counts between prod and dev. And we see that counts are off by 11 and actually in an unexpected direction. So it actually seems like we lost 11 records, and that is definitely unexpected because we were hoping to pick up records that were not being included in dimorgs. So need to keep digging. We can use an accept query and we can find 11 missing IDs. So this is pretty important, and you would definitely want to do this if you realized you were missing records. Doing a left outer join, you could see the full detail on those 11 missing records. You could do a full outer join if you were missing records from both sides. So you've started to get an idea of what's going on. Definitely glad I didn't push straight to production. Ad hoc queries were the way to go in this case. DBT tests are going to help catch, as I mentioned, a few things that we can anticipate, not null and unique values. So those tests all passed. And we also have relationship tests on downstream models. And that tells me all those relationships were valid. So think about this for a minute. All of these DBT tests passed, and yet we have missing records. So something is not being caught by the DBT test suite right now. The downstream models. A best practice when developing in DBT before you make a code change is to make sure all your downstream models will build. And they do, but that doesn't look into the data impact on the downstream models. What about our spreadsheet approach? So this is where we would dump our IDs into a spreadsheet, do a VLOOKUP, and we would eventually find our missing 11 records. So you've kind of seen how we can approach testing today without additional tooling. This all assumes we have time, motivation, and as far as I think of it, kind of superhuman discipline, no distractions, you get the idea. I think it's just not fair to expect this level of manual testing rigor of anyone at all, including ourselves. Fortunately, it's not necessary. I want to make another point. This style of testing is difficult, it's time consuming. It's also inherently inconsistent. So you very likely won't check the same things as your teammate or the same things as your past self or future self because you can't test everything. So there's a lot of subjectivity in what gets tested. And that's where it just becomes really easy to make a basic mistake like dropping these records that we just caught. We just spend a fair amount of time digging into, and this is where data-diff can help automate the whole thing. So this is the code diff that we were just looking at. We've all seen a code diff. A data diff is like a code diff, but well, I'll get into the but. So here we're looking at production code on the left and development code on the right. With a data diff, we actually compare the data that the code creates. So consider, as a data practitioner, why do we even look at a code diff? Well, in large part, we're assessing the impact of the code change on the data. We definitely should look at a code diff, don't get me wrong. But a lot of what we're trying to do when we look at a code diff is to say, how's the data going to change? So let's look at the data diff. Let's compare every single value. We can see values that have been added, deleted, or updated. So this is where if you are oohing, awing, and gasping, this would be maybe the first opportunity to do that in this presentation. So take your time with that and I'll move right along. So you'll never be able to get that image out of your head. you really do want to be thinking, what's the data diff when you make a code change, no matter how you go about testing. That's the visual. So now that I've kind of set the stage, I've exhaustively described what current testing methods are and kind of set the stage for what we might do instead. Let's get right into data-diff, the open source Python package with dbt. So here's that trusty code diff that we've been looking at. Sticking with our same change to the dim-orgs model, we can use data-diff to accomplish much of the testing we covered earlier, but truly in a fraction of the time. And to use data-diff with dbt, simply run data-diff --dbt following any dbt run. So we've really built this to be turnkey, hopefully just incredibly straightforward for any dbt developer once they've got it set up, which is also, you will see, pretty straightforward. So what data-diff does is it compares the data, it diffs the data from a dbt run in development to the same models in production and finds every single difference between the tables. So you could actually run a data diff without looking at a code diff. You should have both, but I'm making the point that even with only the data diff, you would get a huge amount of information. And this is what it looks like in action, specifically in a GIF. So you can see there is a dbt run, development models are built, and then the data in the development models are compared by data-diff to the same data in the production models. So let's take a closer look at the output. First, we can see what's being compared. The same table, dim-orgs, in prod versus dev. Nice. Next, we can see that two columns were added, org name and employee range. Removed columns would also show up there. Next, and this is where it gets really interesting, we can see 0 rows were added and 11 rows were removed. So, you know, we've already spent a lot of time going over those changes, but let it sink in for a second. Without any of that other work, you would have immediately known that there was data loss due to this code change that you weren't expecting. I also want to call out that this is not as simple as simply running a count star of both tables, because you could count the rows in dev versus prod and find a difference of 11, but that could also be explained by 13 rows removed and 2 rows added. Even scarier, the row count could match exactly, but 1 row could be removed and 1 row could be added. And that would mean the primary keys don't match exactly, and a count star would not catch that. So maybe you can start to tell I lie awake at night sometimes thinking about these scenarios. Moving right along from that uncomfortable scenario, we can see that 112 rows had some kind of update. And the values updated section helps us see exactly which fields had values change. And it looks like 112 updated rows had some kind of change to the created at field. All the other fields are unchanged, so that's good. That makes us feel confident in, that we didn't cause some other unexpected change in the model. With data-diff dbt tagged on a normal dbt run, we can already see some really helpful info that under normal circumstances we'd either miss or we need to do ad hoc SQL, spreadsheeting, YOLO, you get the idea, to find. So this technique is both easy, straightforward, and it can be consistently applied as you develop. What about downstream models? So this is something that comes up. Sometimes folks say, I only edited one model, so I need to check that model. But there can be, if there are missing rows, if there are changed values, that can actually impact downstream models that the code didn't touch at all, even if they were successfully built in your dbt PR job. In this case, we'll look at 3 downstream models that could be impacted by our data updates. And you can actually use dbt's node selection to diff multiple models, including everything downstream. So just add a quick plus to your dbt run. You can actually use any node selection syntax, and data-diff will simply pick up whatever was run in the last dbt run. So this will run dim orgs as well as everything that was diffed downstream, and then the data-diff results will display. And so right away I can see columns added or removed, records added or dropped, fields with changed values. Keep in mind you can use data-diff multiple times as you develop, as you edit files. I would say as soon as I start editing code, I build the model and I run a data-diff. And in this case, I can see we're actually removing and updating records from financial models, sales sync models. Those seem sort of important. And so I'm glad we flagged the impact, and then I can begin to start digging and really focus my efforts on any querying I do from here. It'll be very directed. I won't waste my time, and I won't miss anything in important models that had impact. So I'm guessing the audience is pretty excited right now. There's probably a lot of hooting and hollering. So I am now going to get into the hands-on demo so that you can have a chance to do some of this yourself. So before we move on and I kind of open it up and guide you through this installation and your first data diffs, I do want to give a quick shout out to Doug Beatty of DBT Labs. So Doug contributed to our project. He actually added DuckDB support, and he came up with this a template for this demo, which we're using today. It's entirely self-contained. You don't need to connect to your local or your remote data warehouse. So that's pretty nifty and really makes it possible for us to do this kind of hands-on demo. Okay, so I hope everyone's warming up their keyboards. To ensure you don't run into any issues, and again, feel free to just relax, kind of watch, but I hope some of you do try this out live. We do recommend you have the following prereqs. If you don't have all of the above, ping us in the Slack, ping us in the chat. We will try to help. You can also follow along without running this locally, as I mentioned, and I'll just call out, I will be using VS Code. The docs are in the GitHub repo, which I believe are going to be shared to the chat. And yeah, so I think we're about ready to get started. Let's make sure. Oh yeah. So okay, I think I want to. I'm going to unshare and then reshare so that I can kind of put my README and VS Code next to each other. So bear with me for a moment. All right. And if someone in the chat could just let me know. Yeah, thanks, Dan, for sharing that. So if someone who is following along and going through this with me live could just kind of confirm that they've got the README open, that this is all kind of making sense, that would be appreciated, just so I know how to paste things or what to correct. So I'll let folks who are following along go ahead and click on that. And yeah, let me. Okay, got it. So as I mentioned, jumping back into things, if you want to check your prereqs, you can go ahead and run the commands at the top. So just scrolling down to the prereqs. And I'm going to kind of talk through all of this in what might feel a little exhaustive, but I hope for some of you will be appreciated, will kind of help this make sense. So the first step I'm going to do, and this is a brand new directory. So if you're in your terminal, your command line, you can kind of choose wherever you want to work through this. I chose to make a new directory. So if I type ls, I'll see it's completely empty. There's nothing contained within. So the first thing I want to do is just verify that Python and Git are installed and available. You can always click on that little copy button and actually just run the whole block, or you can run one line at a time. But if I run the whole block, I see Python, Git, so I feel pretty good to go. All right, the next step is to clone the repo. So this is going to clone the repo that we're actually looking at right now and cd into it. So do these one at a time. Oh, and the other thing I'm going to do is, sorry, I'm just adjusting my screen. I'm going to open the file browser so you can kind of see things as they happen. So this was previously empty. I just cloned the repo. Now we can see the repo. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to cd into it. And then I will check out the relevant branch. Okay, so now we're in this DuckDB demo branch. So this is, if you hadn't figured out, a DBT project. We've got a few models. You might recognize some of these models from our presentation. All right. So I will pause for a minute just to let folks catch up. All we've done so far is gotten into a command line terminal. I'm in VS Code and checked for the prereqs. Let's just copy paste this section. And then clone the repo, cd into the repo, and check out a branch. And definitely, if you do get behind, don't feel too much pressure. Feel free to, just watch, and then we can also connect on the Slack later if you want to give it another shot. So I'm going to move along to creating a virtual environment. This is where we're going to install everything that we need to install. And this is I think this is kind of interesting. What you're doing when you create a virtual environment, which was, not something I knew how to do not too long ago, you're creating a folder. And that folder, which you just saw popped up here, is going to contain Python packages, including data-diff. So then I'm going to run these next few lines. This is going to activate the environment and upgrade pip. Pip is the package installer that we're using. Okay. And then I'm going to run this line to install requirements. So basically what this is saying is it's a file that you have in your local repo, and it says what you need for this demo to work. And so this is a way to just keep everyone on the same page about what they're installing. Instead of saying install this version of that, I just say run this one line, install the requirements file, and everything will be installed. So now we will watch code fly by and feel like hackers. Thinking, all done. Nice, okay. Another tip is if you're feeling like this is cluttered, you can always write clear. It just brings you to the top. Everything is still there. Okay, so now we're going to activate the environment again. And that's going to kind of reactivate now that we've installed all that stuff. Finally, we're going to unset this variable, which if you are a DBT user, you may have set, and that will confuse the demo. Don't worry that when you open a new terminal, it'll come back. So this is just to kind of have a clean environment in your demo. Okay. All right. Looks like Joshua is caught up, which is awesome. Love that. So now we're in the setup phase. Thanks for bearing with me for some of that infra, if you will. I do think it's worth kind of walking through a little bit so that this is not just, flying by. And I'm not asking you to completely just trust me and run code. I want you to know what you're doing. So the first step on that note is to DBT build the production model. So keep in mind, you just downloaded a new repo. You are going to connect to a DuckDB, which is local, but nothing exists. You've never run this DBT project. So I'm going to copy this line, which builds the entire project full refresh to the prod target. And by the way, the prod target is defined in your profiles file, which you also just downloaded. Okay, so we're going to see 21 models running. It's very fast. It's a pretty small project, pretty fast local database. And then we need to build our dev models. So I'm going to copy this line. No need to set the target because the assumed target is dev, and that's also defined in your profiles YAML file. Okay, so we've built two. Now we have two data environments, dev and prod. And now we're going to edit a file. So I'm going to make this a little wider just so I have a little more room here. We are going to update the dim.orgs file. And one little quirk here is what I want to do is uncomment the dev code so that is, the update, and I'm going to comment out this prod code. So this is what we just built. I'm going to comment that out. Now to do that, this is just a little tip that I discovered while prepping. The default SQL is going to be Jinja SQL potentially, or it was for me. I'm going to switch it just to regular SQL so that I have the convenience of multi-line commenting. So on an Apple in VS Code, this would be command / under the question mark, and I just commented out the prod code. And similarly, I'm going to uncomment the dev code. Great. So I've made a change. Notice I don't even have to git commit or anything like that in order to test out this change. So now that I've made that change, I'm going to run a single model, and this is kind of the aha moment. Hooting, hollering, gasping, oohing, eyeing, all of those things would be appropriate now, because we are going to build this model, dim.orgs, and data-diff dbt. So this is what I showed you earlier in a GIF, but now we're going to see it in the command line. And I'll expand the window a bit once it's done. So this should look pretty familiar. There you can kind of see the whole command there. So dbt run, dim.orgs, data-diff dbt, built the model. And then these are those results. Rows added, rows removed, updated, unchanged, and the values updated. So let's now do the same thing, but with the downstream models. So I'm just going to add that plus selector. This is kind of mimicking what we walked through already, but now we're doing it live instead of in a slide deck. So I hope this is working for some of you who are following along. And yep, so I'm just going to run this next one, dim.orgs plus. So we've got these 4 models. You can see sales sync, monthly financials. Oh, and here we go. So there's that same dim.orgs model that we just diffed. But now we have updated updated rows, removed rows in all of these downstream models. Finally, you can run, and this is a relatively new feature that we've added. You can run a single model, yearly financials. Seems kind of important. We want to dig into it. And so this is really handy to be able to use a select flag. If you, let's say you just built a DBT project, or you had like a longer DBT run, if you have a bigger project, and you just want to be able to diff one model without having to rerun DBT in any way. So as long as the model exists both in production and development, you can use this select flag and zero in on a model that seems kind of important, yearly financials. Someone might ask you about that one. And you can see there is indeed one updated row, and both values in terms of revenue and subscribers are updated. So this gives us a sense that before we make this code change, we might want to dig into some of those numbers. Finally, when you're ready, not to hurry anyone along, but you can deactivate this environment when you're finished. And oh yeah, so I mean, I hope I'm getting your name right. All passed without warning. I think the step you may have missed is updating the dim.orgs file. So one of the steps that we did, and this isn't as explicit in the README, is we uncommented, or we basically make any change to any model. So in this case, we commented out the production code and replaced it with dev code, and then reran we reran the models. So yeah, once you make any change and then save it, you can run the model, and then you will see, yeah, you'll see the impact in the data diff. So definitely, and yes, Dan, good point. Save the file. Yeah, so definitely, I know this is kind of the first time going through this for all of you, and I am hoping that it's starting to be clear, even if you're running into a couple of hiccups, how this can be a powerful tool. So yeah, so that kind of concludes the demo portion. I am going to walk through just a couple more slides to wrap up. And I also encourage you all to continue asking questions in the chat. If you have any questions about how this works, about how to get set up, now is an excellent time to ask them. So while you're doing that, and while you're hopefully playing around with data-diff, bear with me while I reshare my slideshow. Okay, so just a couple of slides to wrap up. As I mentioned, I use this whenever I am developing in DBT before I open a pull request. It just automates so much that I would normally do using ad hoc querying, using spreadsheets, using exhaustive code review, and still not really feel great about my ability to say this is rock solid. So I hope I've convinced you that data-diff is pretty cool. It's something that can really change the way you develop in DBT, and it can give you peace of mind, higher quality of work, all these things that just make life better. So how can you get it set up in your DBT project outside of this demo environment that we just walked through? 3 easy steps: install, configure, and run. So I'll walk through those steps. Installing it is, and by the way, when I say easy, it's about as easy as what we just walked through. And so I'll walk through how that would work in more of a real world DBT project. So to install, and I think the docs, which we have on our website, walk you through each of these steps. You can see here, these are the databases we support, and this is the very, very simple pip install you can run to get the latest version, depending on your database connector. To configure your project, all you have to do is tell data-diff where your production data is, and another step that I'll get to in a moment, which is adding primary keys or giving data-diff a way of finding them. So to update your DBT project YAML, you'll just need to say what the prod database is, what the prod schema is, and if you have custom schemas, there are instructions in the docs for how exactly to configure that. Examples where you can say, oh yeah, that example looks kind of like my DBT environment or my Snowflake warehouse setup, and so that is how you might add like a prefix to a custom schema or something along those lines. So it'll just be 1 or 2 lines, and we're definitely available if you get tripped up on that. And then, as I mentioned, primary keys. So all of this really does depend on primary keys being unique in your database. So for that to work, there are a few ways for you to tag primary keys in models that you're diffing. You can use DBT meta tags. You can use DBT regular tags, and that can work great, but in a larger project, it could be a little cumbersome to add. And so we've recently added support for primary key inference from uniqueness tests. Kind of assuming that a lot of you have uniqueness tests in place, for primary keys. It's an important thing and a common thing to have enforced and tested in your project. So with that in place, you don't actually need to change anything to designate primary keys for data-diff. And by the way, that does also work across multiple columns. So you've got, you can use dbt utils, unique combination of columns, to do that. And you also, if you do choose to go the tagging route, all you have to do is add that primary key tag to multiple columns. We'd want to remove friction, make it as easy as possible for folks to use data-diff. And that's why we're taking feedback. That's a big part of why we're hosting these sessions. So you can try it out. Let us know if there's a blocker that we can help you get around by a simple update. You might have even seen when I was running data-diff 0.7.9 version, there was a little notification telling me to upgrade. What that means is that Dan pushed a new version yesterday. But I stuck with the old one for the sake of the demo. But that includes some really cool features as well that I hope you'll try out. So what did I say the steps were? Install, configure, and run. So that's like a mantra you can kind of say as you walk down the street: install, configure, run. So you've installed, you've configured, you are ready to start diffing. As we saw in the demo, you can run data-diff as a single command following dbt, or you can run it as separate commands. It really just depends on your workflow on any given day or preference. But sometimes it might make sense to just save yourself the trouble, run it as one line, or separate them for whatever reason. Totally up to you. Finally, as you did also see in the demo, you can use the select flag. So this is another exciting development. We're taking feedback. We're iterating quickly on this. We're learning what really matters to our users. And we're really driven to make data-diff something that everyone just can't live without. It just makes sense to use it. You can't forget what you've seen once you realize that you could be seeing the actual data changes and not just relying on code diffs and spreadsheets. So we're about ready to wrap up. This is a link to our documentation. If you want to whip out your phone and take a picture and bookmark it, you can use that QR code. And so that is where I would suggest you go next if you want to get started with data-diff and in your project. Also, I really encourage you to go to the dbt Slack, join our channel, so we can continue this conversation. I do want to thank, before we wrap up, Sarah Brabas, Dan Lowen, and the rest of the Datafold team. I get to be on camera today, but this is a huge team effort. And so I am really excited to be a part of it, and I appreciate you joining. Did I mention we're on the dbt Slack? It's the Tools Datafold channel. You can also open an issue in the data-diff repo. You can, if you find a bug, if you have a feature request, we are all ears. So sincere thanks to everyone for attending, playing along, enjoying this morning or afternoon with me, or middle of the night if you're around the world. We're really excited about data-diff. We really believe in it, and hope you give it a try after today. And finally, announcements. So we do have some more events upcoming. On July 27th, we will hold our 10th virtual data quality meetup, DQM. So the theme is data migrations and the role of dbt. So we will have some of the best data practitioners who we're really excited to have join us, from companies like Fitagram, Two Chairs, FAIR, and our CEO Gleb will moderate a panel discussion. And finally, truly finally, we will send you a confirmation email with a calendar invite if you go ahead and sign up for this. We will also be sending out a recording from this session in the next day or two. And that is pretty much it for me. So thank you so much for joining. Talk soon. I will be definitely hanging out here for a couple more minutes to answer any questions that might be in the chat or you might think of before we wrap up. So thank you again. Really appreciate you all. Yep, so that is, Dan has shared a link to the demo database. Yeah, I also want to make sure that open source installation gets set up. So I'm going to share that right now. Yeah, so this is our beloved open source documentation page. It walks you through the setup. There's a little video in case you want to share like a shorter version of this with the team. And trust me, it is only one simple page of documentation. It is not overwhelming or dense. Yeah, Kyle, regarding BigQuery naming, definitely reach out with those details, Kyle Pierce, and we'll help you sort that out. And if there's anything we can update in the docs to make it easier for folks in the future, we will do that. Just scrolling through the questions to see if there's anything. Looks like Dan has been super on top of those. So thank you, Dan. Yep, yeah, we won't be at Snowflake Summit, but maybe next time. And as Gleb mentioned, we'll definitely be around virtually, kind of like this. Okay, looks like we're starting to wrap up. I'm not seeing too many questions come in. And Chris, I think I see you've got some config questions. I would encourage you, just because we won't be able to keep this chat open indefinitely, to follow up in the Tools Datafold channel. Just because I don't want any questions or answers to get lost. Not to mention, I want people who are outside of this demo to be able to see. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm gonna go off camera now. But thank you again for joining. If you do have any follow-ups that you think of later, join us in the Slack, and don't hesitate to reach out.